Hello and welcome to this Conservative Friends of the Commonwealth event. We are honoured today to be joined by Liz Smith, who's the Shadow Environment Secretary in the Scottish Parliament, an ex-Scotland cricketer and a candidate for Perthshire and South Gloucestershire. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well indeed, actually. It's been quite an interesting time with obviously a very different election, but we're working very hard to try and win Perthshire South and Kinrossshire, where in 2016 I managed to get the majority of the SNP down to just 1,400, so we're really trying to overturn that this time round.
How's it been getting back to campaigning? It's been obviously a very tumultuous year.
I think we've all learned a huge amount. I mean, I think the one thing that I've had to learn is social media skills, which, you know, I've always been online doing various things, but I've had to get slightly more technically adept, shall we say, than your generation is so good at doing all these things. So actually that's been quite helpful, because I think it tells you a lot about your communication skills and what you have to do in different forum. And so I've actually quite enjoyed that. So I've been doing lots of different videos every day, and that's actually been quite a good experience, I think. But it's, you know, the normal communication which you would have as in door-to-door canvassing, plus a lot of the hustings in village halls or whatever. I mean, obviously that's not been able to take place. So an awful lot of it has had to be either on the phone or digitally. So that's been different. And in one sense, I don't think that's quite as helpful. And I'm sure lots of people who are on the receiving end of us attempting to contact them, I think they would probably rather see us in person as well, but it's just not safe to do that just now.
Yeah, I think personally, at least, it seemed like for a while, especially from a young person's perspective, that the Scots and the Conservatives generally, I think, have over the past decade probably been slightly behind the curve in regards to like technological.
I think you know, it's a very important thing. We've definitely been behind the curve, and I would include myself in that. You know, I've been in the Parliament for 14 years, and obviously hoping to go back. But it's something when I first came in, you know, this kind of thing, this kind of communication, and certainly online videos and you know, Instagrams and all these things, you know, almost unheard of. So you know, from that angle, I actually think it's been a very good learning experience, because I think it teaches you a lot about yourself and how you communicate, and probably actually allows us to reach a wider number of people, but obviously not in the actual you know, personal face-to-face contact.
Yeah. Do you think generally as well this election's been notably different? I think from an outside perspective, with I think All for Unity, I think they're calling themselves now, Alba, COVID obviously renewed in, it seemed very different. Is it the same when you're actually in that sphere?
Yes, it is a bit. I mean, I have to say, in Perthshire South and Kinrossshire, we've not engaged with many people who are supporting All for Unity or for Alba or some of the smaller parties, but you know, we're a slightly more traditional seat in some ways, so maybe that's why. And certainly on the hustings that I've been on, we had an All for Unity candidate on one of them, but we've not really come across many of the smaller parties at all, and people have not really been speaking to us about that. So yes, it's been a bit different, but I mean, if you look at, as you well know, the two ballot papers that everybody receives for this election. The first one for the candidate, the second one's very much about the party, and there's a huge list in Mid Scotland and Fife, which I think is about 14 for different political parties. So, you know, that's Scottish politics, actually. It's because of the nature of the system at Holyrood, it allows smaller parties to try their hand, and so there are probably more of them around. But I have to say, there's not been a huge engagement with them.
No, I think I personally as well, like for anyone that doesn't know, I live in Liz's constituency, and I've been doing some obviously telephone campaigning, and not a single person that I've spoken to has even mentioned All for Unity, which I think is quite a big change. If you're on Twitter or something, they are very loud over there, and it is quite or it was occasionally a fairly well run account, but it seems to be very, very quiet on the ground, which is encouraging in terms of not splitting that.
Yeah, union. I mean, I think it's crucial. And first of all, can I just say a huge thank you to all the phoning and some the phoning that your friends have been doing too, because that is hugely important to us, particularly when there's a lot of people who are very anxious about going outside. And you know, we reckon about 47% of those who will vote have taken a postal vote. So that phoning that you've been doing has been absolutely essential. But I think that, you know, people they do want someone to talk to. And I think it's important that we give them that opportunity through a phone call, especially some older people who, you know, on Zoom or any of the social media, that's just not their scene at all. I think it's important that we give them some confidence and, you know, some feeling that they can get in touch with politicians quite quickly. And that's been good. So thank you very much for all you've been doing.
I think in regards to, obviously, I imagine quite a few people will have watched those election debates that have happened over the past couple of weeks. And I think possibly, oddly, the most frequently said word, especially by the SNP, is just Boris Johnson, which is, again, ironic. Yeah. Not running in this election has not really anything to do with it. But it poses a question in regards to Scottish Conservatives being in this odd sort of situation where opposition in Scotland, but the government in Westminster.
Yeah,
and how do you kind of balance?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. That there is, I mean, it swings both ways, because there has obviously been a huge benefit from the UK government when it comes to things like furlough and vaccinations and some of the economic support that has A, been very necessary, but B, has been very much greater because we've been part of the United Kingdom. And, you know, people respect that Boris Johnson leads a government at Westminster that can deliver that in a very difficult time. So I think that's been very positive. But you're quite right that, you know, Boris is not as popular in Scotland as he is elsewhere. And, you know, and that's, it's the same dilemma actually for quite a few of the Scottish political parties who are unionist, that, you know, they are obviously part of a wider UK base. And, you know, I think we have to ensure that there is a Scottish dimension to that. You know, Boris is not standing at this Scottish election, and we have to prove that as Scottish Conservatives, we have a very distinctive line and that we can deliver for devolution. And it's not just about, you know, pointing out the concerns that many people have had about the SNP government over 14 years, but actually can be positive in what we want to deliver for Scotland. And some of that is being part of a strong United Kingdom, but obviously the other part of that is, you know, very much related to the policies and education and health and transport, all the things that are actually devolved.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. Do you think? I think this question has been posed a few times over the past decade about in regards to marketing. It may almost be this blessing in disguise that because of COVID, there's been a more distinct difference between the Scottish Conservatives and the wider Conservative Party purely because of travel restrictions. Do you think that's been a blessing in disguise, or has that been something that you've had to kind of grapple with in regards to campaigning?
Yeah, I think it plays both ways. Just in relation to what I said previously, I mean, there is no question that this has been an exceptionally difficult time for the country. It doesn't matter which part of the United Kingdom or which part of Scotland you live in. COVID has undermined, you know, it's undermined the economy, it's undermined family life, it's undermined a whole lot of community aspects. And I think what we have to try to do is to show that, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that the priority after the election absolutely has to be on rebuilding the economy and ensuring that people have secure jobs, that there is a secure income that goes with that, that they feel comfortable in their own local communities, particularly if it's a community in which they were born and grew up. And, you know, I think we've got to ensure that that part of our campaign is very much reflecting the anxieties and the needs of many people in our own constituencies and across Scotland. So from that angle, I think, you know, devolved and local politics are absolutely essential. But over all that, there is national politics at UK level. And, you know, there is no question that vaccinations and the way that we approach the pandemic from a medical angle, we've been able to benefit from being part of the United Kingdom. And that's hugely important when it comes to people's health and well-being. So, you know, I think it's important that we don't forget that. And, you know, that's something that I think many people are grateful for, and they resonate with that quite easily.
In regards to wider campaigning on a similar note then, How do you think the balance needs to be found between, and there's probably a better way to say it than this, but positive and negative campaigning? So both pointing out the positives of not only the union, but the manifesto, policies that have been made in Westminster, policies that could be made in Hollywood, but also the negatives and those millions of SNP scandals, the failures of policy on that front. How do you find that proper balance between not coming across like you're just throwing stones and you don't have...
I think that's a really good question that you've just asked. I think there is a balance to be struck, but I think it's a very important question, because politics has changed even in the time that I've been an elected member, whereby I think negative politics sometimes dominates. And I actually don't think the public likes that too much. I think, especially after the pandemic, they want some hope and some optimism. So I think first and foremost, I think they want to see what political parties are actually saying that they will deliver immediately after the election on the 6th of May, because there's no question about it. These policies for rebuilding Scotland after the pandemic are absolutely vital. Yes, there's negative politics, and we see that every day of our lives, particularly on social media. And negative politics plays to part of the agenda, because it's an opportunity for political parties to set out their stall, but to point to the failures, and you've just alluded to some just now. And, I think that the SNP over 14 years has got some pretty significant failures, whether it's in education, in health, in some of the economic issues, tax issues. I think they've not delivered when it comes to rural policy, which is an important part of my constituency. And as you rightly pointed out, when it came to the last few months of the last parliamentary term, there was a huge investigation into the integrity of the Scottish government and some of the key figures within it, about how we go about politics. And, I don't think either the SNP or, dare I say, Scotland came out of that very well. And that, of course, that was, something that went round all our media, not just in Scotland, but in the UK, but actually wider afield. And that didn't give a very good impression, I don't think, of Scottish politics. And that, when the Parliament resumes, and I hope to be part of that, I think there's some question marks about how, Parliament is reformed and how there's much better scrutiny, not just of policies, but actually of individuals who are leading. I think actually that'd be quite an important part, because, let's be honest, politicians are not very popular people just now. The political process is actually probably not very popular. And I think we have to try to address that, because I think the most important thing in politics is that there is a trust between the elected members and their voters. And at the moment, I think that trust has been undermined.
I completely agree. And it seems odd that, again, despite there's millions of other issues that are really, really important to Scotland, but oddly successfully, the SNP have managed to make this about independence again. And it feels like history repeating itself, because every time there's an election, there is so many issues and so many really important things to the people of Scotland. And the COVID recovery is huge, but yet again, it's about independence. How do we really stop that from becoming the whole conversation whilst also fighting?
Well, yeah, I don't think we're going to stop it, because time after time, as you rightly point out, it is top of the SNP agenda when it doesn't matter which news bulletin you listen to or which leaflet you read or who you listen to, the SNP, they're absolutely determined that we will have a second independence referendum. So we're not going to be able to prevent that being the dominant feature in this particular election. But I think it's something that divides Scotland very considerably. And, we can't just let that pass. We have to say, look, this is not the right time for a second independence referendum. And here's why, just as you've said about the COVID revival. But I just think it's frustrating, because I think a lot of our politics has become so dominated by constitutional elements. And I don't think that's what people want to hear, because, there's some very interesting polling. I mean, yes, it's true that the SNP, generally speaking, are doing very well in the polls as a political party, and Nicola Sturgeon's ratings are remarkably still quite high given all the problems that she's faced. But when you look at the polls about the number of people who actually want to have a second independence referendum, that's much lower than those who are actually supporting the SNP. So I don't think there's any great feeling for a second independence referendum. But if it happens, we have to be ready for it.
No, I agree. I think there's this odd sort of logical jump that happens when people just assume that someone even saying in a poll that they would consider an independence referendum and actually putting down on that ballot paper that you want to essentially rip the country into. There's a big jump there where people are happy to say something on a poll, but when it actually becomes actionable, as we saw in 2014, it doesn't really manifest itself into reality.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. I mean, I think it comes down to the economy. I mean, I think, yes, it's perfectly true that Scotland could be an independent country. Nobody's saying that they couldn't, but it's about just how well that independent Scotland could survive. And if you look at the data, especially actually from 2014 when we had the referendum, the first referendum, the Scottish economy is really struggling when it comes to the black hole and to the difficulties that GDP has had in terms of economic growth, when it comes to tax rates, when it comes to the tax revenues, perhaps even more importantly. And we're really struggling from that angle. And that's why I don't believe, well, I've never believed for lots of different reasons, but from a specific economic angle, I just don't think Scotland would be as well off as it is as being part of the United Kingdom.
Absolutely. And this kind of moving away from just independence, because there are so many more important issues, one of which is the environment. And obviously you took over that environment role. I believe was it towards the back end of the summer?
Yes, August.
And that's a hugely important issue, especially to young people.
Yes, it is.
Can you give us an insight into any sort of policy or any sort of...
I think the environment matters very strongly, and particularly, you're quite right, young voters, certainly the ones that I speak to, they would put it between education and the environment. I think it's sort of 1 and 2 in most young people's perspective when they come to vote. And I think, dare I say, I think your generation is very respectful of the environment. I think they understand perhaps better than some other generations about what we need to do. And, I've been very impressed when I've gone around my local schools and talking to younger people. I've been very impressed by a lot of the approach towards the environment. But it's such a huge issue. The environment, if you define it, is massive. It's not just about nature, about the way we look after our forests and our seas and our rivers and our animals. It's much more than that. And there has to be an attitude change for a lot of people because, and that's quite a big thing. I mean, I'll be quite honest. A few years ago when I had to think about my own practices when it comes to recycling, when it comes to how you divide up your waste and, what can you do personally to help the environment? I had to do some thinking, and I hope I'm much more environmentally friendly than I was perhaps, 6 to 10 years ago. But that's not easy to get some of that behavioural change across to many people. For example, if you look around the countryside where you see, unacceptable amount of litter or fly tipping or some of the antisocial behaviour that goes on, we can't have that. We just cannot have it because it's doing such untold damage to the environment. So I think we've got to learn a lot from young people about how they approach these issues, particularly when it comes to animal welfare and to some aspects of climate change and ensuring that we're going to leave the world in a better place for future generations. So yes, it's very important.
Hopefully that the environmental policy that is in the manifesto and that the Conservatives will take moving forward hasn't had to change a huge amount because of COVID. But obviously the pandemic and the economic changes over the past year will have, I imagine manifestos are a long time in the making. And did that change the manifesto a huge amount? And is there things that...
Not from the environment perspective. Yes, it changed the focus of what issues were going to be dominant for the Scottish election. There's no question that jobs and the economy and supporting our communities, that it increasingly went up the agenda, as it did for the health service, quite naturally. But no, I don't think it took much focus off the environment, because I think most people understand that the environment is important. But what we have to do is to get people to understand that we are all responsible for how we behave towards the environment. It's not somebody else's problem, it's our problem. And I think that's perhaps the difference between the last election and this election, that more people, particularly your generation, understand that we all have a responsibility towards the environment. And I think it's pretty graphic in terms of what's happening to the environment. And I think that's, people have responded to that. But there are still really big issues about our responsibilities when it comes to cleaning up the environment. And I'm not sure nearly enough people understand that. And that's one of the things we want to do at this election, is to give the additional powers to local authorities and some of the environment agencies that they can actually prosecute more easily the offenders when it comes to fly tipping or littering or whatever it might be. Because at the moment, neither the local authority nor the Environment Agency has the ability to do that, because they have to go through the procurator fiscal process, which can take for months to resolve. So, there's a natural tendency not to do that. So we've got quite a lot of policies in the Environment Manifesto, which obviously will be launched on Monday. And it's very much about our local environments, about a nature bill, about animal welfare, and ensuring that more people have got opportunities to enjoy the countryside responsibly.
I do think that's really important. That's something that people often forget when talking about environmental policy at a grassroots level, at least, is that these big government programs, as important as they are, it really does have to start at that localized level, and those local authorities need the power to maintain, especially in Scotland, where one of Scotland's main attractions is the fact that it's so green, it's stunning, the wildlife is amazing. That needs to be maintained at a really grassroots level, and I think that does get forgotten quite a lot in.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that's happened in the pandemic is that because of restrictions, more people have been able to enjoy their local environment. Lots more people have gone walking or cycling, or not out to the hills, but they've been to many of the green spaces around their town or in their rural area, and that's good, because I think the appreciation of the environment has become more important and more identifiable during the pandemic. But we need to keep that going, and we need, as I say, the responsibility that goes with it. I mean, look at what happened when lockdown was eased several times, whether that was in Scotland or England or Wales, Northern Ireland. We saw massive groups of people coming together, and the litter that was left afterwards was absolutely appalling, And I mean, that speaks volumes about the responsibility that we have to do to clean up the local environment.
Apart from that then, and obviously the manifesto comes out on Monday, so I don't know how much we're allowed to say, but just to end on a really positive note, what are you most excited about hopefully being able to implement over the duration of the next Scottish Parliament?
I think I hope I get back. That's the first thing. But I think it's very important. I think there has to be some parliamentary reform in Scotland, actually, because I think one of the things that we've not been so good at, particularly between the period 2016 to 2021, is that some of the scrutiny of the Scottish Parliament has not been as good as it should have been. And I would like to see, for example, that when it comes to committees, as you know, there's an inbuilt bias towards the leading political party, and onto committees go people according to the percentage share of the vote that they've had at the last election. I would like to see that scrapped, and that committees have elected chairs who are people who are respected around the political spectrum, and you would end up with committees that have greater expertise than we currently have at present, because people have to fill up the spaces on committees according to the party line, and I don't think that's a good thing. And I think we saw over the last month of the Parliament that, you know, just what happens. I mean, the Scottish Government, I think I'm right in saying that there were 8 votes in the Scottish Parliament which were ignored. 5 of them I certainly know were on education in my time when I was Shadow Cabinet Secretary for Education. And there were a few laterally where, you know, the Parliament voted for something, but it was just ignored by government. And that's not right. We can't have that. Because I think that undermines the integrity of the political system. And I think that puts voters off that, you know, does my opinion not count if you're just going to, you know, rush ahead and do something. And I think we had a lot of issues. Well, originally we had a lot of issues with the named person legislation. We then had a huge issue about the hate crime bill. Yeah. And, you know, I think we've got to get the Parliament back on a level playing field when it comes to a bit of common sense and reflecting what the view of the public is. Because in both named person legislation and in the hate crime bill, there was a huge amount of evidence given to committees in Parliament at the time, very wide-ranging, for and against, huge amount right across the spectrum, and huge numbers as well. I mean, thousands of people writing in. And yet Parliament almost, it didn't ignore it, but it just decided what it was going to do rather than to listen to public opinion. And if you get people of completely contrasting views all saying the same thing, that Parliament's not listening, there's something wrong.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you very, very, very much for that. Obviously, massively good luck on May the 6th.
Thank you.
I hope to see you back in Holyrood again, really implementing all of those things we've talked about today. Hopefully that's been fantastic for all of our listeners. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you again for all the support that you've been given. And please do tune into my social media on various things. And thank you very much for your support.